Can you hear me?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Hello, Delegate Lindsey, how are you?
Doing well. How are you, sir?
I am doing swell. On a hot, steamy day, we are people flooding into the room as we speak.
Good morning.
Hey, Mariana.
Ah,
Hi, Mariana.
hey, how are you, Camille?
Good.
Good. Okay, I'm just renaming myself. Oh, there's my dad. There's Tom.
Ah,
Ah,
everybody, I'm Mariana's dad.
Well, you did great, sir, on that fathering thing.
and there's Tom Martin and Helen, his wife, who's our speaker today.
Both of you, Tom and Helen. Thank you for
Happy
letting me
Independence
join
Day,
the party.
everybody.
Well, it's an honor to have you, sir.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Atoy, how are you?
Let's see.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Congressman Scott is trying to get into the room, but it just keeps saying joining, joining. There he goes. I think he made it in now. Good.
So did everybody watch Hamilton last night?
I did not.
I did
I
not.
don't have Disney.
I did. It was wonderful.
I got to watch it when it came to town, so I felt very lucky.
We saw that one too. There's a marvelous documentary that I did watch on IMDb.
All right. Oh, got a couple more coming in here. So 9:03, I guess we can start, and I'll keep letting people in as they come in. Obviously, the first thing we want to do is say happy birthday to America, number 244. And by God, we can't get to 245 fast enough under President Biden. And I guess one of the things we can be happy for in this 4th of July.
Oh, yeah, I like
is,
that
oh,
one.
hold it, we got to mute.
I like the fourth shirt, but I can't change
Let
it.
me. Oh, I got to mute everybody here. All right. And you know that President super spreader didn't start a forest fire. That's a good thing last night. But anyway, moving forward, I do want to first recognize our officials we have in here. Joni Ivey, former Chief of Staff for Congressman Scott. Hi, Joni. Lawrence Brown, President of the Norfolk Firefighters. I'm going through the list. Delegate Joe Lindsey, thank you very much, sir. And Delegate Nancy Guy, good morning. And somewhere in here, right, oops, I got a few more people to admit. Congressman Scott, you're in here. And I see Diane from Senator Kane's office. And I think, did Andria McClellan just enter the room? Welcome. And if I missed anybody, speak up now. All right, then moving forward, any first-time visitors who, first time you've been on one of our calls? I see Jeremy Owens. You want to unmute yourself and say hello?
Hello, everyone. I'm here at the invitation of Tom Reel. Tom, thanks for inviting me on this call here. And I just came down to Virginia from New York, operating as the Security and Data Director for Elaine Luria's re-election campaign.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I'm
Oh, and of course, Mariana's dad, who we chatted with earlier.
Francis. Hi, everybody. I'm here in Chapel Hill, NC, but strongly backing the Norfolk Democrats.
All right, well, thank you. Like I said, you did good work raising your daughter.
I think so, too.
All right. Then again, we'll do our selected readings for those who this is their first time. Diane Kaufman, when she was chair, started this, some selected readings from the Declaration. We'll go ahead and do that. And normally, as you remember, when we were actually physically in a room, we passed it out and we stood up. Well, this year, since we're in our Zoom state of mind, what I decided to do is just have our former chairs read some of them. And unfortunately, Linwood is up in New York. So filling in for Linwood is our treasurer, Grant Deppen. And with that said, I'm pulling it up here. There we go. And if everybody can see that, they can read along. Latoya, are you on here?
I'm on.
Take it away.
It was 244 years ago that church bells rang out over Philadelphia as the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. This revolutionary document not only formalized the American colonies' united front in the Revolutionary War, but it articulated the ideals of human equality and self-determination that still serve as the guiding principles of American government. The Norfolk Democratic Committee would like to invite our members to join us in the traditional reading of this document.
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation.
Betty?
I'm sorry, my mute was on. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain, can you hear me?
Yep.
With certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such forms as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind is more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for the future security.
In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act of—
Are you on the call?
Every act
No, I'm not on
which
call
may
right now.
define a tyrant.
Okay. I just wanted to remind you.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah. Mr. Scott up there?
No, you want to
Yeah.
read yourself?
Is unfit to be the ruler
Sorry.
of a free people. I'll repeat mine. Do you want me?
Go ahead.
Okay, let me repeat that. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be a ruler of a free people.
Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and we hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends.
We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all of their allegiances to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, that they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states might of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protections of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Hear, hear.
Great words that we, as we said, we're trying to continue to live up to and evolve towards.
Yeah.
So with that, thank you very much, former chairs and stand-in Grant. Want to turn this over. Bobby is on the call. Congressman Scott, you got any great updates you want to pass on?
Yeah, I noticed I wasn't on the agenda. You got some great people on the agenda, so let me just point out that in the last few days, the House passed the police bill, which provides for more accountability, bans chokeholds, no-knock warrants, and racial profiling, collects data, and you know, it's a great bill, and it passed with it had more than 98% of the Democratic caucus on as co-sponsors, so we're really proud of that. We passed a great infrastructure bill, which for the first time included school construction and housing money, and we passed improvements to the Affordable Care Act. So it was a great 2 weeks. We're not optimistic about what might happen in the Senate. The HEROES Act is already over there. It has significant funding for state and local government and for education. So we'll just have to see what the Senate does. I suspect McConnell was all hot to trot about how it was dead in the water before it even got there. But I suspect that there's some Republican governors and Republican school board members that are saying that have already told their Republican senators that when the schools open in September with 50 students in a classroom, because that's all the money they had, that they're not only not gonna cover for their Republican senators, they're gonna blame the Republican senators for not picking up the bill and passing it like it had already passed the House. And all of this cutbacks would not be necessary but for them playing politics in Washington. You've seen McConnell kind of backtrack a little bit and say, well, he'll introduce something in a couple of weeks. But a lot of things expire at the end of July that may put the economy in jeopardy. We have had an economy that survived. Stock market collapsed and then came right back up because people noticed that all those 40 million people that were unemployed were still getting paychecks from the unemployment compensation, including the plus up of $600. So the economy came right back. That $600 evaporates. The economy is going in the tank, and all the economists know about it, and they're whispering that their Republican friends don't do this. So we had a couple of good couple of weeks. We'll go into appropriations bills when we come back in a few days. And but the Democrats in Washington are showing what happens when you elect a Democratic House, just like Virginia showed what happens when you elect a Democratic House and Senate.
And we'll get to that. Appreciate it. And by the way, you are always on the agenda, whether in writing or not, Congressman. Yeah, I wanted to get to you. I wanted to roll back one more time, reflecting on the Declaration. And I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the Declaration with a little bit of historical context. And Mariana White, great teacher at Granby High School, reached out and got a friend, her history professor of hers at Granby. And he's just going to spend a couple of minutes with hopefully some interesting tidbits before we get to our House of Delegate representative. Mariana, who'd you bring in here?
Okay, I want to introduce Tom Martin. He's an outstanding teacher who's taught for 40 years in public and private schools here and in North Carolina. He got a master's degree at ODU, specializing in American history. And so now today he's going to talk a little bit, I believe, and lead a discussion in the connection between the Declaration of Independence and its cornerstone is in the Bill of Rights. So take it away, please, Tom. Thank you so much.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to spend some time with you all today. Thanks especially to Mariana White for reaching out and contacting me. It was nice to know that a retired member of the old guard at Granby High School was still being held in consideration. I am quite honored and excited and pleased to be able to share these couple minutes with you today. And I'm going to use the words of both Mariana and Charlie. They said that my task was to share some tidbits with you today. So tidbits will be the focus of my presentation. I'm going to introduce this by saying that from the standpoint of a teacher, teaching the Declaration of Independence is always a challenge when you're trying to get those concepts across to students. There's very challenging vocabulary. You almost feel like you need to caution them to have a dictionary or thesaurus on hand. There's extremely difficult and dense phraseology, and in a lot of cases it's obscure. There are political concepts that are completely abstract and difficult for students to understand. As you all know from reading the Declaration, there's a long list of grievances that have been purposely, let's call it, genericized by Thomas Jefferson. And I can hear my students say, where's the Stamp Act in there, Mr. Martin? Where's the Townsend Act? I don't see that. There's no name for that in there. And that was done intentionally. And then finally, there's a list of the signers, and they are complete. That list is completely devoid of any context. We know nothing about them. We know nothing about the authors as well. So it is my goal and my purpose today to do something about that, to put a little bit of personality into what happened. So let's start the story on June the 7th. On June the 7th in 1776, Representative Richard Henry Lee from Virginia, a delegate to the Second Continental Congress, stood up and proposed a resolution. And it was already read by one of you earlier. And this is the only thing that I hope to have to resort to my paper for. I don't want to not give it its full impact. This was his resolution: resolved that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. That statement right there, that statement constitutes the genesis of the Declaration of Independence. That's where it began. The exodus, if you will, the departure from England doesn't happen for 7 more years. So where did the Congress go from Lee's resolution? They chose 5 members to write it. Now, we normally associate Thomas Jefferson, but there were 5 members designated. And it's important to note that the members of Congress wanted to make sure that there was a fair and equitable representation among 3 colonial regions when they wrote this document. So they had 2 representatives from the New England colonies. That would be John Adams from Massachusetts and Roger Sherman from Connecticut. They had 2 representatives from the middle tier of colonies. That's Benjamin Franklin from Pennsylvania and Robert Livingston from New York. And of course, the southern contingent was represented by Thomas Jefferson. Now, what history books do not go into any great deal about is there was actually quibbling among those 5 members, especially the top 3, that would be Jefferson, Franklin, and Adams, as to who should be the lead writer of this document. And this is one of those things that I want to believe is true, but there is no documentary evidence to support this. Benjamin Franklin, it is alleged, basically discounted himself and pulled himself out of contention by saying, if you all let me write this, I can guarantee you, knowing myself as I do, that I would include a joke in there somewhere. So he pulled himself out. Later constitutional scholars say about Franklin's removal from consideration had a lot more to do with the fact that he was not revolutionary enough, nor was he a libertarian enough to write this document. So Franklin is out of the picture, and that leaves only 2 people, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, who, although they were on different sides of our government as our government proceeded through its Federalist period, they were both in contention for this, and they came at it from 2 different points of view. John Adams later confided to Jefferson, after the Revolutionary period was over, he confided to Jefferson and basically said, there were 3 reasons why I pulled myself out of contention. 1, that you're a better writer than I am. And I always find that John Adams had quite an inflated ego, and I find that hard to believe. I know it's true, but he had a hard time admitting that someone was a better writer than he was. Second, he said, you're a Virginian, and a Virginian should lead this effort. And third, and very importantly, he said, because I am obnoxious, suspected, and unpopular. And I believe he's saying he's basically blaming the unpopular part of it due to the fact, it's not an extremely well-known fact, that John Adams was the Boston attorney who defended the British soldiers who shot dead 5 Bostonians during the Boston Massacre. So John Adams himself probably was still stinging from the negative feedback he got from that. So that leaves Jefferson, and Jefferson, as we know, becomes the author, the chief author of this, and the other four names that I mentioned essentially became editors of his draft. Okay, so let's go into the document itself, and I enjoyed your beautiful reading of that, and I'm going to go into a couple of those things in a little bit more detail.
All right.
There is a brief
You can wrap it up
preamble.
in about 2 or 3 minutes, Mr. Martin.
Pardon?
Go ahead. 3 minutes. Go ahead. Just a couple more minutes. Yep.
Oh, okay. Then I'm going to skip right to this then. I'm going to skip right to this. That let's flesh out some of these signers a little bit if we can. So when the document is completed, it behooves the members of the assembly to decide whether they're going to sign it or not. And the last lines of the declaration say, "We mutually pledge our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor." I just want to let you know those words had actual consequences. And there was an extreme amount of tension and consternation and second guessing among the members who sat there whether or not they should sign this. So our friend Benjamin Franklin steps in and he says, essentially, knowing that by signing this, by adding your name to that document, you were declaring yourself to be a traitor and were liable to be hanged. Benjamin Franklin said, "Let us all hang together on this, or we will assuredly hang separately."
Right.
So let's flesh out this a little bit. Of the 56 people who signed, 5 were captured, tortured, and died in prison. 12 of them during the course of the American Revolution had their homes ransacked and burned, and 9 of them were engaged in actual fighting. They put on a uniform and died from the wounds that they suffered during the war. And I think it behooves us as Virginians, I just need 1 more minute, to look at 2 specific Virginians. Carter Braxton. Carter Braxton was an extremely wealthy colonial merchant who gathered his wealth in the maritime commerce. And once he put his name on that document, his ships became a target for the British Navy, and he lost every ship that he had. Despite that, this patriot loaned unbelievable amounts of money to the Continental Congress for the prosecution of the war. And when the war came to a conclusion, he sold his home and his property to pay off his debts that he had incurred. And despite that, he died a pauper. The second person is someone that all of us here in Tidewater know, Thomas Nelson Jr. Thomas Nelson, during the Battle of Yorktown, was informed by George Washington that his home, his family home, was being used by the British General Cornwallis as a headquarters. And Washington contacted Nelson and told him that fact. And rather than tell Washington, "Please leave my home alone," he authorized Washington to use the colonial artillery to open fire on his home and destroy it in the off chance that they might have some negative impact on Cornwallis and his staff. When the war was over with his home destroyed, he also had a similar fate to Carter Braxton. He died bankrupt. So I was hoping to make some connections between the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. I guess we can hope that in a few questions that I had for you and maybe questions that you had for me, we can address some of those concerns. So first of all, I'll ask, do any of you have any questions? I can't guarantee an answer, but I'll direct it off to somebody else if I need to. Yes.
Do you have a paper that explains all this? That we can
Yes, I do.
Okay, how can I get it?
I would gladly send a copy to Mariana, and then she can push it on to all of you from there.
Thank you.
Yes, I have a copy of my notes, so I'll be glad to forward those to you.
Thank you.
There is a section on the grievances that I would like to have discussed, but that's fine. Any other questions? All right, I have, according to my understanding of today, I have several questions myself that I would like to pose to you.
Well, unfortunately.
Is that where we're going with this?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, right now, Mr. Martin, it is 9:30, and I have some members of the Virginia General Assembly that want to talk to us about some of the bills and the things that just went into, the laws that went into effect. So I think we probably need to wrap this up, and thank you for your insights. Is there any last question before we go to our delegates and senators?
Could he maybe send it to us in chat? Send the questions to us in chat so we can think about them later?
Sure.
Can we do that?
Yep. Okay.
Well, we could try to do that, yes.
All right. Okay. And again, thank you very much. It was interesting. And I guess as we go forward, you know, it was interesting. Yesterday, I was reading the transcript of Frederick Douglass's 4th of July speech, which brought somewhat of a different perspective in terms of what Independence Day or the 4th of July meant to the enslaved peoples in America. And I guess at some point, maybe next year, we'll bring Frederick Douglass into the discussions. Those were incredible words that he spoke as well. But with that, again, thank you, Mr. Martin. Moving it over to the General Assembly. Let's see, and did Senator Spruill get on the call yet? I didn't see him. I didn't know if one of these. So we'll make this a House of Delegate.
Yes, I did, Charlie. I'm here.
There we go. There we go. Well, it's going off with the what did you call it? What do you always call the Senate? The upper chamber, the upper body, the something. But go ahead. You're up.
Good morning to all. I was trying how to figure this thing out. We're looking forward, Charlie, to the special session and what we're doing. On the Senate side, we got 40 bills. What we picked at least 4 or 5 out that we want to really concentrate on. Number one, we put a bill in as police reform. That bill would be put in by Senator Mamie Locke, expanding prosecutor court discretion mercy. That be put in by Senator Deed. Expanding local authorities. That's be put in by Jennifer McClellan. And what that is, that give authority to discretion on things, I guess, pertaining to the city and state matters. Racial profiling, that will be put in by Senator Louise Lucas. She's put that in. And sentencing guidelines, Senator Morrison, what happened was we could try to look at again as far as some of the guidelines, as far as what we are doing as far as the sentencing guideline. That will be put in by Senator Morrison. Prison reform. Prison reform has been put in by Senator Bosco. And what happened was we are concerned about the reform on the way the guideline they have for prison now. Should be doing that. And the COVID relief, that Jennifer McClellan. Me, myself, we're looking at all the bills, what's left, if there are any bills that are left as far as the Jim Crow law that were put on the books back in the early days. So we're looking at all of those and we're gonna put those in. And lastly, we're hoping that the governor will be very careful as far as what we will do and how we can do it pertaining to this COVID-19. We're gonna look at that very carefully as when to fully open up phase 3. Whether or not if things will get bad, we'll go back to phase 2. We have 30 states that this COVID-19 epidemic, what you want to call it, has risen as far as the case, people who are getting sick, 30 states. We are aware that New York has banned Florida and a couple other states from people from coming to their states without a 14-day guarantee. So we're looking forward to working with the House to see what we can do as far as things that would change. Last I want to talk about as far as the monuments concerned, that we're hoping that there are some discretion on some city and what state laws concerning exactly who it belongs to. Is it on city property, is it on state property? Who has the right to say yes or who has the right to say no? So there are some of the things that we're doing in the Senate. So they are our main bill that we are hoping to look forward to. We were told that we may go back in session by August the 18th. That's what we have now. Thank you so much.
All right. Delegate Lindsey, good morning.
Good morning. Very much echo, many of the points that have been made by the good senator. We've made a lot of good progress in the last legislative session, and the COVID-19 pandemic has put some of that good work at risk. What we're trying to do is have a measured approach in terms of looking at the re-benchmarking of the Commonwealth's finances and make a determination as to those things that may have a little bit of a delayed enactment versus those things that we may have to take off the board altogether, given the financial challenges of the Commonwealth. It does appear, that in some respects the finances are not as challenged as we once feared. I think with one of the last reports I saw, it was at it was half of what the projection had been, and so that's good. I have to thank the good congressman and his colleagues up in Washington, because there's no question that many of the bills that they have been advancing have been very helpful in causing us to be able to ride out this challenge. In terms of legislation that I expect we're going to be dealing with in the special session, I think, of course, the thought of the day is that we have to look at criminal justice reform. We have to look at social justice initiatives. We have to make sure that our legislation and our laws are reflective of the diversity of our Commonwealth. And then, and you see that in the last General Assembly sessions, we looked at enhancing some of the laws even for persons who were here as illegal workers. It's a challenge as offered by one of my colleagues when people are invited here to be workers, working on crafts and businesses and chicken produce plants and the like, but seasonal workers that come from out of the country, and yet there's not the opportunity for a driver's license. There are not some basic protections and that's something that was changed recently with the last General Assembly session. So I think that what you're going to find with the special session is that we're going to try our best to be prudent with the budget, while at the same time looking at trying to maintain the progress that we made with some of our progressive legislation this past General Assembly session. I also think that we're going to try to give confidence to our diverse Commonwealth in terms of what we look at in terms of policing, and what we look at policing practices, and what we look at in terms of making this diverse Commonwealth an inclusive one. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
All right, thank you. And you get the award for the most interesting background there. Not sure what that is. In the interim, I did see the greatest treasure in the greatest city, Dawn Hester, has jumped on here. Hi, Dawn, good morning. Don't know if you're bicycling this time again. And City Councilwoman Andria McClellan did make it on the call, so good morning, Andria. With that, Delegate Guy.
Thank you, Charlie. I guess I'm batting cleanup here, which is pretty overwhelming, having been preceded by Congressman Scott, Senator Spruill, and Delegate Lindsey. I'm going to harken back a little to what we started with, which was a reading of the Declaration of Independence, which starts with the aspirational statement that we hold this truth to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. At the time, that was a revolutionary statement, because it was not believed by anybody, and it certainly was not articulated by any government, that there was equality amongst people. We have not always lived up to that aspirational statement, and clearly at the time it was written in the 18th century, it was intended to apply only to white males. But we have made progress in the intervening almost 2.5 centuries. And I think today, of all days, in addition to recognizing where we've fallen short, we should celebrate that progress. And here in the Commonwealth, we made further progress this year. All of you know that we became the 38th state that ratified the Equal Rights Amendment, which finally recognizes that women are part of that mankind that is created equal. We've now kicked it up to Congressman Scott and his to extend the sunset clause so that that ratification can have effect and enshrine in our country's founding document that women are part of the mankind that was created equal. I think that was a huge step forward for the Commonwealth and indeed for our nation. We also passed the Virginia Values Act this year, which kind of agreed with, thanks to Justices Gorsuch and Roberts, that our LGBTQ citizens are also equal under the law and cannot be discriminated against in employment, in housing, or in public accommodation. I consider that a signal success this year. And as Delegate Lindsey referenced, we did spend this year repealing at least 90 pieces of discriminatory Jim Crow legislation that still clutter our state code. And for me as a freshman, it was fascinating to hear those bills read off as each patron got up and presented them, the things that we had in fact left in place. I mean, something as archaic as a bill that required segregation of passengers on steamboats plying the Virginia rivers.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Charlie.
But we did repeal all those, and I think even though many declared unconstitutional or not being enforced, it's important that we take this step to look back and actually tidy up our code. And I think perhaps nothing we did more symbolizes the change that's reached Richmond, because we care not just about slogans. We care about making our code reflect who we are. And I feel like we really made strides towards that. And I think today, of all days, we should celebrate that success. Now, that said, we can't ignore the fact that we still have a long way to go, that we still have work to do. And that work is going to start August 18th when we get back to Richmond, especially in the area of equality. We can't just tear down monuments. We need to actually do something to uproot the systemic racism that is part of our culture that has allowed us to move from slavery, Jim Crow, to massive resistance, and now, indeed, mass incarceration. I think the one area where we fell short this year in terms of what our goals were was criminal justice reform. Delegate Lindsey did a superb job of bringing forward probably more bills than a single delegate on the issue that actually made it through. And we did have some signal successes. You know, we did pass the Fishback Law reinstating parole. That was Delegate Lindsey's bill for those people who had been sentenced in the time frame where parole didn't exist, but juries weren't told that parole didn't exist. And you should have heard the Republicans on the other side. You know, we were going to let all the rapists and murderers in Virginia out on the streets just because we were trying to do what was equitable and fair. We increased the age at which someone can be charged as an adult from 14 to 16, and we took away the prosecutorial authority to just make that decision. Now a prosecutor has to go before a judge and prove that someone was with the adequate mental capacity to be treated as an adult moving forward. And there's so much more that we can do and should do. One of the bills that I'll be focusing on, I've been working closely with my seatmate, who is Delegate Don Scott of Portsmouth, on his bill, House Bill 1532, which I urge you to read and support, which will create a good time sentencing program to kind of chip away at the existence of parole. My belief about what we do in our criminal justice system in Virginia and indeed in America, but I can only affect Virginia, is that we lock too many people up. We lock them up for too long. We lock up people of color, and we don't do anything to give them hope while we do nothing to transition them out when they leave. And we have to change that, because I firmly believe that the point of our criminal justice system is not punitive, but in fact is rehabilitatory, and that, you know, if people make mistakes, we should ask to get them. So that's going to be a big focus of my efforts in both August and in the ensuing session. Hearing and addressing bills that were referred to them, and hopefully we'll move forward on that. And also, we're going to be having public hearings by both public safety and the courts and justice committees that will elicit input from the public about what public really wants to see on police reform bills. I have hosted 2 town halls myself that included both police personnel, others from the community, from the Black Lives Matter movement, and tried to pass that up to the speaker. We aren't quite as advanced as the Senate in that we don't have our bills set and ready to go, but that process is going on, and I urge anybody and everybody who wants to be heard on the issue to reach out to your delegates and say what you specifically want to see, and also participate in those hearings. We are at I think, a historic tipping point where we can make significant improvements and make our Commonwealth and indeed our Republic everything that we aspired to be when that document was signed 244 years ago. Thanks.
Before I open this up to questions for our panelists, I think Councilwoman McClellan has something she wants to offer us. Andrea?
Sure. Good morning, Norfolk Democrats. Good to see all of your faces this morning. Just want to give you a couple of updates as to some of the things that are happening in Norfolk. As you know, we took down our Confederate statue that was on Main Street, long overdue, and there will be a public hearing this Tuesday on the 7th that folks can sign up and talk about where that ultimately goes. The council has signaled intentions that we plan on moving this to one of our historically Black or white cemeteries with other Confederate dead monuments that are there. No decision has been made as of yet, but if you want to participate or watch, you can do so on the 7th. Also, there was noted in the paper, there was a time capsule that was recovered at the base of the statue, and the Daughters of the Confederacy, we have not opened it. We will not be opening it, and we are going to be turning that over to the Daughters of the Confederacy, in case you were curious about that. There's been some discussion in the news recently about use of force records in the city of Norfolk. The chief and the city manager have been out and having very good conversations with the folks who are at City Hall, and we hope that will end today in terms of the folks who've been surrounding City Hall. But specifically, I've been talking with the city manager about what Austin's doing. They have an Office of Police Oversight in the city of Austin, and I am going to recommend that that is something that we consider and implement in the city of Norfolk. I do strongly feel that we need some independent oversight of our data, and they do a really great job. And I'll put that in the chat. I'll put a link if you're curious and want to see a little bit more about what Austin is doing. But I feel strongly that's something that needs to be implemented. And to our state legislators, citizen review panels, oversight, to the extent that you can enshrine that in some sort of state code, that certainly would be very helpful. The last thing is, Angela Williams-Graves and I are going to be co-hosting a community conversation on police reform. So stay tuned for that. We want to show one city and have a town hall opportunity for people to talk about that. And then lastly, the Mayor's Commission on Racial Equity, Social Equity, and Economic Opportunity. We have yet to announce the membership there or a meeting date, but it's my understanding from talking with the mayor and his staff that that is moving forward, but I have nothing more to talk about there. So thank you for that time. I appreciate it, Charlie. Happy 4th, everybody.
All right. Any questions for any of our elected representatives here? Floor is open.
I have a question.
Yes, Jim.
Yeah, thank you. Congressman Scott, can you tell us about the sunset clause and the steps that would make it an amendment?
Sunset clause on what?
The ERA.
Oh, that was really controversial because there's if we were to pass the elimination of the expiration date, it would suggest that we needed to pass the elimination of the expiration date. If the House passed it and the Senate didn't, it meant that the House thought it needed to be done and it wasn't done. I think we would be stronger if the Congress just remained silent and argued that Virginia's ratification as the 38th state just did it. The deadline was not part of the text of the constitutional amendment, and therefore it's done. Declare victory, it's over. Once the House passes the, essentially eliminates the expiration date, it announces that we believe that that was a meaningful part of the process. And when the Senate didn't do it, what does that say? We don't know. It's all going to litigation. Both sides are suing. So we'll just see what happens. But my view was that we would have been better off not pass. There was no good that could be accomplished by the House passing an elimination of the sunset clause because the Senate wasn't going to do it.
Right.
And therefore, it was a useless exercise. If the Senate was going to do it, then maybe it would have done something, but the Senate wasn't going to do it. So all we did was invigorated the idea that the sunset clause was a barrier, and we didn't eliminate it. So what's done is done, and we'll just let the courts worry about it.
What's the timeline? Like, could it not be passed, or if it could be passed,
I thought the House passed it and it's over in the Senate to die. Let me check on that. But after that, it's all in the courts anyway.
Oh, so it's going to take years?
It's all in the courts.
Any other questions?
I've got
Yes, I have a question.
Okay, who is that?
Carrie?
Carrie and Rami. Carrie, you go first.
Oh, thank you, Rami. Question I have has to do with the minimum wage, and I know it was raised during this past session, but with the $600 a month that's coming in on the unemployment, that is often more than what some people were making, particularly restaurant workers. And so I'm wondering, how do we address this? Sorry, it's my dogs. How do we address this issue and get the level of pay that restaurant workers have, because they don't make a normal minimum wage. They make it off of tips. And I'm not too sure that they truly do, with some management being a little unscrupulous, shall we say.
Anybody want to tackle that?
Well, let me start off, Charlie. There's someone, I'm hoping someone can finish it up. Now, even though the minimum wage went into effect July 1st, they remember that it was just not the whole thing. 2023 would be up to $15. But as far as what's happening right now, I don't know. I don't know whether or not how we can take what's happening with the epidemic stuff going on, as far as how they can how it can be tied in. So I really can't answer the question as far as because of that, as far as the restaurant workers, as far as how they can be tied in what's going on now. So I don't know how we can do that. So I can't answer that question because we don't have anything that I know of to tie that in, that what would take place. So maybe one of the other members of the General Assembly can help us out on that.
Now, I'm not sure what the impact of the COVID programs are. We did pass the increase in the minimum wage, but tipped workers were exempt. It doesn't take effect until May 1st of 2021 now. The increase will be to $9.50 an hour. Employers will be required to document that tipped workers make the equivalent of $9.50 an hour. Right. So I guess, it's the same old. We got lobbied pretty heavily by tipped workers not to include them because they wanted to make more. At least I did, pretty heavily by people in hospitality industries. We will start at $9.50. The step up will then go to 11. Then it'll go to $12.50. Then we'll go study it all again. Then we'll see how far we get to 15. Obviously, the recession and the economic turndown has slowed us a little bit. $9.50 an hour sounded a lot more doable when unemployment was 2% than when it's 10%. But we have enshrined that in code now, and it will be happening. So people should take some comfort that it's on the books and it's coming. As to the interface with the $600, there is none.
There we go. Go again.
Dollar, based on their employment, and you didn't have to. It wasn't wage based, and it's up to Congressman Scott and his colleagues to extend that beyond the July, cutoff, so that we can keep our economy going. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure whether it does or not. That's what I know.
What we know about government is it's incrementalism. As we get what we can at the time we can get it. And I think if anything in this General Assembly shows, turning the U.S. Senate, putting it into Democratic control this November is crucial, besides electing, of course, Joe Biden, on a whole host of issues of importance to working men and women. So, yeah, it's critical. Let's see, I got some hands up here.
Charlie,
yes, sir.
I just put in the chat box a link to an article on the ERA extension vote that we passed. It was in February, before the coronavirus stuff. And it outlined some of the legal arguments going back and forth.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. All right, trying to wrap it up quickly here. Raman?
Yes, thanks, Charlie. Morning, everyone. Question to Joe and to Nancy about the criminal justice reform measures. The Senate and Senator Spruill and his colleagues passed a lot of really good legislation this past spring that wound up not getting out of the House. The two that I can think of, one was the bill to eliminate the huge penalty that defendants pay for taking a jury trial, and the second one was for compassionate release of terminally ill inmates from the Department of Corrections. What do you all rate the chances of those bills passing out of the House now, either in the special session or in the general session? As the Senate did the heavy lifting on that.
Rami, let me start off by saying I think that those bills that left the Senate, one of those, I had one of those, but I think our Senate colleagues, let me start off by saying that our Senate colleagues, when they went to the House, there was some, if I can use the word riffraff, you want to say it, between the Senate, our Senate colleagues didn't do it right. And what happened was, and it kind of, and this is my personal opinion now, it kind of made some of the members on the other side to the committee saying, hey, wait a minute, you come here with these bills and they didn't do it right. And sometimes when you, let me use the word, tick somebody off sometimes, I think they were good bills. And I think the communication between the House and the Senate, let me blame the Senate, was not shared the way, I see you laughing, Joe, that's why I said that. They were not where it should have been. So let me blame the Senate. And I think because of that, we think that some of those bills did not get through because we didn't do it right in the Senate. Mr. Lindsey, please help me out, sir, please.
Well, I'll tell you that, it is never a situation where good measures just happen. It's a lot of groundwork. It's a lot of background. It's a lot of building coalitions, and much of the legislation that's being talked about 3 years later actually got started 3 years ago. When I came in and I put in legislation for body-worn cameras, you would have thought that by our police officers and policies for body-worn cameras, you would have thought that I had two heads. Now it's something that's very much a cause celeb. It's the point of the day. Same thing when we put forth efforts for the increase in the larceny threshold amount. We had a larceny threshold where if you stole something that was $200, that it was a felony, and that was just ludicrous. We were one of the worst in the Commonwealth. I put that bill in when I first came in. Others had put it in before me, and still the challenge was there from persons in the opposition saying that, oh no, this is going to be terrible. We're going to basically give a cost of living increase for thieves, not even giving consideration to the fact that statistically speaking, most of the people who were getting ensnarled in that were the young kids who weren't even going to be given a shot at life because they were ruining it before they ever even had their start. So so I was very pleased that progress has been made. As it relates to the two acts that have been brought, just been discussed, I can tell you compassionate release is something that we're giving some real consideration to, and I believe that while it may not get through in this special session, I'm almost positive we'll be able to get that through next General Assembly session. All it just takes is us working together, and I think there's a will, and I think we're going to find the way.
And Ron, me to help you out also, we, those of us who are non-lawyers in the Senate, what we got to do is to make sure that our colleagues who are lawyers in the House and the Senate work together on that. I truly believe what it is. So my job, Ron, is to help y'all out. My job, y'all, is to play golf with Joe Lindsey and let Joe beat me. Then that way, when we go back in January, I'll say I got Joe to behave himself, and he can take care of us in the Senate. And I'll send to y'all, please be nice to the House, because those two bills that you were talking about, had we been on one accord, I think something would have happened. But we think now, on a serious note, we really believe on a serious note that when we work together, we can get things done. And we look forward to bringing those two bills back.
Okay. Yeah, we're running over time, but the discussion is good. I did want to just ask Treasurer Hester, since you're great enough to be on the call, is there anything you wanted to bring forward?
No, just have a wonderful holiday weekend, everyone. Be safe.
All right, thank you. You too. Let's try and wrap up. There's a few more hands that are raised here. My former neighbor, Louis Eisenberg. How are you?
Hi. Oops.
Great background, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to ask our elected officials to really start considering not naming buildings, facilities after individuals. We have seen what kind of problems this has caused, and I would like to really, Charlie and members of this group, to read a quote by James Baldwin about what these types of monuments really do to our view of history and our ability to be able to change. And this is James Baldwin's quote: "My point of view certainly is formed by my history, and it is probably that only a creature despised by history finds history a questionable matter. On the other hand, people who imagine that history flatters them, as it does indeed since they wrote it, are impaled on their history like a butterfly on a pin and become incapable of seeing or changing themselves or the world."
Interesting.
Well, thank you for that. And I want to note that years ago when I was touring Venice, our tour guide pointed out to us that there are no statues of civic leaders in Venice anywhere, because the Venetian Republic had a rule that only saints, only, you know, Christian martyrs or whatever could have statues, and that anything that anyone did to move their society forward was celebrated for the thing it did and not for the person who did it. And so they were actually prohibited. And if you go to Venice, you will see that there are no statues to or aggrandizing people. And I think as we enter this very interesting time in our nation's history, we might want to consider that we celebrate our milestones and not necessarily individual people, because people are flawed, and as history goes forward, you're going to find out different things about them. When I was on the school board in Virginia Beach, we passed a policy that we no longer name any schools in Virginia Beach after individuals. And we've stuck to that in the 20 plus years since. We actually have some schools that were historically named after people, but all the schools after that are named after usually geography.
Charlie, I have a
I
question.
agree with you.
Let me add one other quote. We were naming a something after somebody who, and the quote was that we should not name buildings or monuments after people who are still living, because he said, "I'm sure somewhere in America there is a Richard M. Nixon High School that seemed like a good idea at the time."
Oh. All right. Was that you trying to jump in, Dave?
Yeah, this is a question for Congressman Scott and everyone else. On the subject of renaming monuments and such, I read that there's some discussion about renaming the USS John C. Stennis aircraft carrier, U.S. warships. One, is there any serious thought to that? And two, if so, can we rename it the USS Jeremiah Denton? Over.
I haven't heard anything about, I've heard about, everybody's heard about naming the military bases after Confederate soldiers, that we consider renaming them. And I think there's strong momentum on that. And I think there is language in the National Defense Authorization Act that's pending now that would facilitate renaming the bases that are named after Confederate generals. I haven't heard anything about renaming any ships.
Well, if our elected officials are still good, we still got a couple more questions. If we can go to about 10:15 and go from there. If we can make our questions very short and sweet. And let me see, Ruth Shepard.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, thank you. It's a short question. I'm concerned about the restaurant workers, the wait staff, the dishwashers, so forth. And I wonder whether they are coming under this umbrella of the state with respect to increased wages. There are so many restaurant workers, and I am concerned about them. So whoever can answer that, I would appreciate the answer.
Well, as I
What about-
said, tipped workers were expressly exempt from the minimum wage bill at their request. Other restaurant workers, you know, dishwashers, busboys, those people would be subject to the minimum wage increase. But, you know, the way tipped workers, the way the statute's written, the employer has to ensure that the tipped workers' tips do give them a wage that's the equivalent of the, so they're kind of covered, but not really. But most of the tipped workers that I talked to indicated that they made more than the minimum wage and didn't want to be held down to do it. Because, yeah, I mean, I literally dozens of people got in touch with me asking, tipped workers asking that they be exempt. Because what was going to happen in most instances is restaurants were going to go to straight wage if they were subject to it and increase their prices and exclude tips altogether. And most of them felt like they would actually make less money.
All right. Any closing comments from some of our great elected officials? And I will, before we turn it over to them, if you need a referee in that golf match between Joe and the senator and the delegate, I'll be happy to referee and even drive the carts.
Charlie, on the minimum wage, we eliminate the tip minimum wage on the federal level. The problem, as Nancy said, the employer is obligated to make the employee whole if they don't make enough tips. The problem is that never happens. And no employee is going to go in and say, hey boss, I didn't make the minimum wage, give me some more money. It just doesn't happen. The violation is notorious. Some people obviously make a whole lot more in tips than anywhere close to the minimum wage. He'll be making hundreds of dollars a night. Minimum wage is, you know, $25, $50 a night, depending on how many hours they work. Many of them make hundreds of dollars. The experience where they eliminate the tip minimum wage in states where they've done that, they rarely go to a straight untipped wage where the employer discourages tips. In states where they've done that, they keep getting tips as they had before. So it's we need some information to see what the experience is. It is a controversial area because those who are in high-end restaurants that in one, you know, you get a tip hundreds of dollars. If the fare is hundreds of dollars, you may get $100 tip just on one table. People don't want to do anything to mess that up. But that's not been the experience. But I can imagine what Nancy's been hearing from fancy restaurants in Virginia Beach. The little diners where the fare may be $3 or $5 or maybe $10, where the tip is $2.50. You may go an hour where you don't make the minimum wage, and certainly not anywhere close to $15. So there is a differential in what kind of restaurant you're working in, what your attitude is about the tip minimum wage.
All right. Anybody else with some closing thoughts?
Charlie, I just want.
Excuse me. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Before we leave, I see we lost a couple of people. I wanted to note that Glennis Mason will be hosting a virtual voter registration training July 8th at 6:30 p.m. You can contact her via cell or email. Her cell phone number is 717-9141, area code 757, 717-9194. And I put that in the chat box, so if you can see that message there. And if you want to sign on, please do. The renewal for third-party voter registration expires June 30th, a few days ago. So if you were certified to do voter registration, it's time to renew that certification.
Okay, thank you. All right, anybody else? Senator?
I just want to ask everybody to please be safe out there. Be safe. Watch out if you're going to the beach. Be safe. Joe and I, we laugh and we play golf. We have a good time and we are safe. And we have a nice time. Charlie, come on, join us. But on a serious note, asking y'all to please be safe, even with your own family. Be safe. You'd be surprised those who are getting sick because someone in the family from out of town come in somewhere else. So be safe, y'all, and enjoy your 4th of July. Thank you so much.
All right. Delegate Lindsey?
It's always my absolute joy to join in with this great Democratic committee. I'm a thumbs up for leadership in terms of our Zoom conferencing. It keeps us in touch. We need the benefit of our interaction with you. You may take some pleasure in your interaction with us, but we need to know what you're thinking. We need to know how you feel, because it gives us guidance in terms of what we do going forward. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Guy? Anything?
I think everything's been covered. Happy 4th of July to all. Stay safe out there.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. It was very informative. And once again, Mr. Martin, thank you so much for joining us and providing some of that historical background. Very interesting. And thank you very much. And Mariana, thank you for tracking Mr. Martin down for us down in Chapel Hill. With that said, thank you very much. Our committee meeting coming up, I think it's on the 16th. And if you're not a member of the committee, go to our website and pull down the form so you can join us. But with that said, happy 4th of July, happy birthday, America. And let's get to work to get it. Whoop, what's that?
Oh, and when they join, they get a free mask.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I've delivered some of those masks. They came out great. They really did.
Did you want to mention the speaker for the July meeting?
Is it officially booked?
Yeah.
Oh, I knew it was tentatively. Well, Ms. Kaufman, the regional director of Tim Kaine, has an announcement to make on our business meeting.
Senator Kaine will be the guest speaker. Thanks, Charlie.
Oh, and to everyone else, Ada Blair's birthday is also today.
Happy birthday, Ada.
Yeah, I think she's 76 today.
And congratulations to Andria, McClellan, and the rest of the city council for their inauguration event this past week. And Atoy did an excellent job, Michael, with doing that inauguration ceremony. So
thank you.
Congratulations, Andria, my Super Ward representative.
Yeah, Norfolk is very lucky. We're represented by some wonderful people, and now we have to keep it that way this November.
Yes.
All right, with that said, all right, any other last open mic night things here? No? All right, well, thank you very much. Congressman, as always, thank you to our delegates, senators, Andria, and our other elected officials. Thank you so much. Happy 4th. Stay safe, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Love y'all.
So long, thanks.